Ever get that feeling, you're putting a ton of effort into something? Could be work, could be relationships, even just your day-to-day. And you kind of wonder, what's the lasting impact? Is this actually going to pay off, like beyond just right now?
That's such a universal question, isn't it? That need for something more enduring. And it's exactly that kind of feeling that leads us into today's deep dive, which is, well, a bit unique.
Yeah.
We're going to explore some ideas from a text called The Morning Murli, specifically one dated November 4th, 2025.
Okay, The Morning Murli. Now, yeah, this isn't your standard source material, is it? We're not talking academic papers or news reports here.
Not at all. Think of The Morning Murli as more of a spiritual reflection, a kind of daily guide offering insights into, well, the nature of reality and our place within it. It's a different lens on some pretty big questions.
The different lens. I like that.
Exactly. So our goal today, our mission, if you like, is to unpack some key concepts from this specific Murli. We're going to focus on detachment, this idea of donation, and the cyclical nature of existence is presented here.
Right. Trying to find clarity on why these things might matter, even with how busy modern life is.
Yeah.
Or after those aha moments, yeah.
That's the plan, hunting for those insights.
And we've got our expert here to help us unpack it all and maybe connect it to some broader perspectives. So let's dive in. The Murli kicks off talking about the end of a play and a call for detachment. What's that about?
So the core idea presented is that the world we know now is seen as an old world, and it's nearing the end point of a 5,000-year cycle.
5,000 years. Okay.
Yeah, think of it like huge seasons, maybe. And the text really stresses letting go of our deep attachments to this specific world. That means, possessions, relationships, even our businesses.
There you go.
The focus shifts instead towards remembering our real home, spiritually speaking, and a new kingdom that's believed to be coming.
Okay, so it's not about just checking out or becoming totally indifferent, is it? It sounds more like having a different viewpoint. Maybe like how you'd feel about a rented house versus one you own. There's a different kind of attachment.
That's a great analogy.
This idea that things are temporary.
Yeah.
Actually, that can maybe help folks not get so overwhelmed by the day-to-day stresses.
Absolutely. It's framing detachment not as like a negative thing, giving stuff up, but as a positive preparation, preparing for something new.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that nothing in this current setup is permanent and that, clinging too tightly can actually lead to more suffering down the line.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So then the Murlian moves on to donation. It specifically asks, when is a donation important? What's the core idea there?
Right, and it gives a very, very specific answer. A donation really counts, it says, when you give it with absolutely no strings attached. No lingering feeling of, that was mine, or expecting something back in this life.
Huh. No strings.
Yeah, it actually says, if you donate something, but you keep thinking about it, like with that sense of ownership.
We sort of hold on to it mentally.
Exactly. Then you don't get the full spiritual benefit. The return isn't received in the same way.
That's fascinating. It's almost the reverse of how we often think about giving, isn't it? Where maybe we feel a bit of pride or, satisfaction in being generous.
It is quite different. This is saying the real value lies in the complete act of letting go.
Okay.
And the Murli introduces this concept of making donations focused on a return, but in the next birth, which, might sound a bit unusual.
A return in the next birth. Wow.
It encourages seeing our current stuff, our possessions, as things we're just looking after temporarily, like a trustee.
A trustee, okay.
So it's a whole different perspective on wealth, not ultimate ownership, but something to be used wisely and then, passed on or given selflessly.
Okay, trustee, next birth.
Yeah.
This seems to lead into that other point about getting a return on investments, but specifically in God's service. This sounds like one of those potential aha moments. What's the deal there?
Yeah, this is a big one in the text. The Murli makes this pretty significant claim. Anything used for what it calls God's service. And the examples given are things like hospitals, colleges, things that benefit a lot of people.
Okay, things for the common good.
Right. That kind of contribution is said to yield a return for, get this, 21 births.
21 births, wow. Okay, that is definitely a long-term investment strategy.
It really is. So the idea seems to be that when our actions, our resources are directed towards like larger selfless purpose, The positive ripple effect lasts way, way beyond our current lifespan.
So it's not just about traditional charity for personal merit points, maybe.
That's how it's contrasted, yeah. The Murli contrasts this with, say, building dharamshalas or hospitals in traditional devotion, maybe hoping for a good next life. Here, the emphasis is really on that selfless intention and the broad benefit being the key to this incredibly extended spiritual return. It's about service that really lifts humanity.
Okay. The discussion then pivots back to this 5,000-year cycle,
Right.
and specifically the idea of destruction. How does the Murli talk about that part of the cycle?
It brings up that 5,000-year cycle again and states that this old world is heading towards a major transformation, which it does term destruction.
Destruction. That sounds intense.
It does, but it uses this metaphor too, everything being sacrificed into this sacrificial fire. Now, that might not mean a literal fire, more like a necessary cleansing, a transformative process marking the end of this era and the start of the next.
So like a massive reset, a period of huge change. And it also mentions misers wasting property in this context. How does that connect?
The point seems to be that clinging to possessions with excessive attachment, being a miser, especially when this big transformation is on the horizon, is ultimately, well, pointless.
Because it's all temporary anyway.
Exactly, but the Murli acknowledges that naturally we all want some return for what we do, but it stresses that even good actions from past lives that might bring wealth now, that wealth is still temporary compared to the spiritual growth, the study that can be undertaken now, that has a much more lasting value.
In the spiritual growth, this study is happening in what it calls a spiritual university and hospital. And the donations help build that.
That's the idea presented, yes.
Yeah.
That these selfless contributions given with detachment are basically funding or laying the groundwork for this spiritual university and hospital.
Okay.
But the crucial bit, again, is that once it's given, you have to let go of the attachment to get that full 21 birth return, health, wealth, happiness from what's called the Eternal Father.
Right. That detachment is key.
And it also throws in a reminder that even the physical buildings we have now, they're temporary too, part of this whole cycle of change.
Okay. Then the Murli uses the term shramat and makes a very stark statement. Death is standing in front of you. Whoa, what's the meaning there?
Shrimat is explained as being guidance, directions, coming directly from the Father, that divine source.
Okay, divine guidance.
And that line, death is standing in front of you, it's meant to create a sense of urgency, I think. Urgency about practicing detachment, about making these positive spiritual investments now.
Because time is running out for this cycle.
That's the implication. The Murli suggests that during this coming transformation, material things, worldly credits, they'll all be lost. So the wisdom lies in focusing on the spiritual return, the one that endures.
That sense of urgency, it seems tied to another phrase. The fortune of the poor children opens when the Father comes. That's quite evocative.
It is. The Murli suggests that perhaps those who have less materially in this world might have a clearer path, maybe fewer attachments, so a greater opportunity for spiritual advancement when this divine guidance, the Father's knowledge, becomes available.
An advantage in a way.
Perhaps. It also talks about Bharat, meaning India, saying it was once the richest land, but now it's the poorest. It draws a parallel, suggesting that all souls are currently spiritually impure in this Iron Age or Tamo Pradhan state, and are transitioning towards a pure Golden Age or Sattva Pradhan state through these spiritual efforts now.
Sattva Pradhan. Got it. Now, the text seems to push back quite strongly against some other common beliefs, doesn't it? Specifically about the length of these cycles and reincarnation into animals.
Oh, absolutely. The Murli is very direct here. It refutes ideas of world cycles lasting hundreds of thousands of years, and it refutes the concept of souls going through, 8.4 million animal species.
It calls it a lie.
Explicitly calls it a lie, yes. It holds firm to the 5,000-year cycle and insists that this current human birth is the final one before souls return to their original spiritual home.
Wow, that's a very definitive stance.
Yeah.
Really puts the emphasis on the significance of this moment, this human life.
It does.
The Murli also mentions our intellects being transformed from stone to divine. How's that supposed to happen?
So the idea is that our understanding, our intellect, gets fundamentally changed. It moves from being dull or stone-like to becoming refined, divine through engaging with this specific knowledge being shared.
This specific knowledge from the Father.
Exactly. It emphasizes that this understanding is unique, it comes only from the Father, and it's not something, say, traditional Synthesis could explain, nor is it just about intuition or getting inspired. It's presented as a distinct body of knowledge that causes the transformation.
Okay. And there's this other phrase, transferring baggage to Baba. What does that mean practically?
Right, Baba is another term used for that divine Father. Transferring baggage is really a metaphor for surrender.
Surrendering one.
Surrendering all those attachments we talked about, the worries, the sense of me and mine, basically giving it all over to the divine.
Okay.
And the understanding presented is that in return for this total surrender, the promise is receiving everything needed in the coming golden age.
I see.
The Murli uses the example of the individual through whom the Father speaks in the text, saying, this person faced insults and criticism but maintained they weren't doing anything themselves. It was all Baba. It even connects this to stories like Sri Krishna and Draupadi from Scripture, highlighting divine help that comes with surrender.
That idea of shifting identity seems linked to becoming soul conscious instead of body conscious. Can you unpack that difference? Why is it important here?
Yeah, that's a really central distinction. Body consciousness is when our primary identity is tied up with our physical body, our looks, our roles, job titles, possessions, all that external stuff.
How most of us operate most of the time, probably.
Very likely, yes. Soul consciousness, on the other hand, is about recognizing our true, deeper identity as a spiritual being, an eternal soul.
Okay.
And this shift is seen as crucial because it helps us view the body differently, more like an instrument. The text uses the example of a harmonium that the soul uses. Right. And being soul conscious, the Murli says, naturally helps us develop positive divine virtues and stops us from causing sorrow to others. It's about operating from that deeper, truer self.
Got it. The text then links the current times to the Mahabharat War. That's a huge epic in Indian tradition. What's the connection being made?
The Mahabharat War, with its themes of huge conflict and transformation, is used symbolically to represent this current time seen as a period of, yes, destruction of the old world order and profound change.
So a time of upheaval.
Exactly. The Murli basically says, look, everyone is going to experience the end of this cycle. Everyone will die in terms of this old world. So the more you focus on spiritual benefit now, the better your position will be, the greater the return you receive later. It implies those who ignore this miss out on that lasting reward.
To really get all this, the Murli says you need an unlimited intellect. What does that mean in this context, unlimited?
I think it means needing a mind that's really open and broad, able to move beyond narrow, conventional thinking. An intellect that can grapple with these huge concepts, the long cycles, the idea of a spiritual source, the diversity of religions and paths in the world, how each individual soul plays a unique part. Seeing it all as part of this vast, intricate drama, as the text calls it.
A bigger picture view.
Yeah, a totally unlimited and broad perspective is needed to really absorb these ideas.
And this drama, it's described as eternal, with souls having 84 births. And it even seems to say there's no permanent escape from the cycle.
That's correct. That's a key point. The concept presented is that each soul is an eternal actor playing its part in this continuous drama. The drama unfolds over the 5,000-year cycle, encompassing 84 human births for each soul.
84 births.
And the Murli states very clearly, no soul can be permanently liberated from the drama, nor can new souls be added or existing ones removed. It's like a fixed cast in a play that repeats eternally, though each cycle has its unique nuances.
Wow, okay. No escape, just playing your part.
Yeah.
So if we're all locked into this eternal cycle, what's the point of remembrance and service, which the Murli stresses so much?
That's a great question. Remembrance in this context means consciously directing your thoughts, your intellect, your feelings towards the Father, that divine source, the source of purity and knowledge. Maintaining that connection.
Okay. Focusing the mind.
Yes. And service has a dual aspect. It includes sharing the spiritual understanding with others, but also, importantly, fulfilling your everyday duties and responsibilities while maintaining that detached, soul-conscious perspective we talked about.
Balancing the spiritual and the practical.
Exactly. The text urges constantly churning this knowledge, thinking about it deeply, and strengthening that remembrance, that connection. It suggests that serving the spiritual government, as it's sometimes called, ultimately benefits the self.
There's also some specific advice given for people who are involved in spiritual centers. What should they be mindful of?
Right. For those active in these communities or centers, the Murli gives some pointed advice. Focus primarily on your own spiritual effort, your own transformation. Avoid getting caught up in waste thoughts like gossip or criticism about others.
Keep your side of the street clean, basically.
Essentially, yes, it brings up the principle of hear no evil, see no evil, but applies it spiritually. Concentrate on your own progress. Don't get sidetracked by negativity or what others are doing or not doing.
And don't give up.
Definitely. It discourages sulking or stopping the study if things get tough, reinforcing the idea that this is the essential school for the soul's development.
Okay. The core relationship is framed as God being Father, Teacher, and Satguru. How does seeing the divine in those three ways shape the practice?
It emphasizes the different facets of the relationship and the support offered. As father, there's inheritance, love, belonging. As teacher, there's the knowledge, the study, the understanding. And as Satguru, there's the guidance towards liberation or the highest destination within the cycle.
Different roles, different benefits.
Precisely. And the instruction is to connect your intellect in yoga, meaning focused, loving remembrance only to this one source embodying all three roles. The promise, again, is huge. By doing this, souls can become the #1 masters of the world in the golden age.
Masters of the world, okay. There's also this image of souls having clipped wings due to impurity or Ravan. How do we get our wings back?
Yeah, the clipped wings is a powerful metaphor. It represents the soul's current state weakened, unable to reach its full potential or fly back to its original state of purity because of the influence of negativity, personified as Ravan.
Ravan, okay.
And the Murli states clearly that only the Father, being the ocean of purity, has the power to cleanse the souls, to remove that impurity, and essentially mend those wings, enabling the return journey home.
So purification comes from that connection.
That's the essence. It also notes, interestingly, that the world population will keep growing until the very end of the cycle, until it's time for all souls to make that return journey.
Right. And finally, the Murli summarizes things with an essence for Dharna, a blessing, and a slogan. What are the key practical takeaways there for someone listening?
The essence for Dharna really distills the practical advice for living this spirituality day to day. Things like stay busy with your spiritual study and service. Practice that detachment, especially with donations. Be soul conscious. Finish any personal differences or conflicts. Work for unity to become a true server.
So concrete actions.
Yes. The blessing reinforces that idea of unity and selfless service bringing success. The slogan is a reminder. Let the canopy of the Father's love be constantly over you, and you will forget all sorrow. And the Avyak signal points to remembering the combined form, the soul connected with the Supreme Soul, as the key to constant victory.
Okay, so wrapping this up, for you listening, this deep dive into the Morning Murli, it's definitely offered a unique perspective on some fundamental questions, hasn't it? The cycles of time, the real meaning of giving, this idea of a spiritual return that spans lifetimes, and the soul's journey back to purity. It's certainly a different framework for thinking about, well, why we do what we do.
It really is. And maybe a final thought to leave with everyone. Considering this concept, this 5,000-year cycle, and the idea that everything in this current world is ultimately temporary, how might that understanding actually shift your perspective on your own daily investment?
Not just money, right?
No, not just money. Your time, your energy, your focus, your emotional resources. Where are you investing them, and with what expectation?
Or, put another way perhaps, if that deep, lasting fulfillment that Murli talks about comes more from detachment, from that spiritual kind of investment, what's maybe one small step, just one thing you could explore today to start cultivating that kind of mindset in your own life?
Yeah, just something to reflect on, perhaps. It's the start of a personal inquiry, really.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for exploring these quite profound ideas with us today. Lots to think about.